Good morning, everyone. Name is Zee Kin. I don't usually sound like this. I am the Assistant Chief Executive in the Infocom Media Development Authority, taking care of all things data, the innovative use of data, as well as the regulation of data. And I like to think that with this approach, we try to make sure that whatever policies and regulations that we bring out will be balanced, because we see the value of the use of data, and of course the technologies that help us make sense of the data that we have. And what I like to see is to have all companies here based in Singapore, working from Singapore, to make better use of the data that they already have. The kind of intelligence that you talked about, getting more of that out of the data that we are sitting on.
Great, so maybe you could take a moment and just describe what Singapore's vision is for this kind of smart nation and a lot of the investments that are being made recently, and of course the announcement that was made yesterday.
Right, okay, so Smart Nation is an umbrella brand. Within this, underneath this umbrella brand, there are three pillars of work that we have started on. Yesterday's announcement was the blueprints for the digital government. The Deputy Prime Minister made very clear statements about what government agencies will do and what the public sector will do. 2 weeks ago, we talked. Last Saturday, we released a second blueprint, which was the digital readiness blueprint. The citizen, the residents here, workers here, people living here, they are an important and central part of our economy. We can't achieve a smart nation unless everyone is on board. And the digital readiness plan is intended to do that. If you are a worker, yes, there are plans for upskilling, teaching, adopting new skills. If you're young, plans to reach into the schools to ensure that you pick up the right digital habits from a young age, to be safe online, to be open to changes, to think about how your career will fit in the new economy. And even if you are the slightly more experienced generation, we've got plans to make sure that as we go cashless, even our parents, people from that generation will be able to adapt to this kind of new technology, will be able to adopt this new technology, just as they have started to make use of smartphones and social media. So the plan is to make sure that all of us are included. The third prong is actually a digital economy framework that we launched 2 weeks ago. It's called a framework because in this day and age, technology is moving so quickly, you can't really talk about blueprints. It's a living document. It establishes a framework that public agencies, enterprises can have a conversation about how they fit within that framework, how we can work together to develop our digital economy. So I don't want to go into too much detail, but this is all here, and more on point about the topic of today's chat, artificial intelligence. That has one very important role to play in our digital economy framework, right? Because we've identified 4 key technology pillars that will power us into the digital economy. Artificial intelligence is one of them, and you can't talk about artificial intelligence without also talking about data, because data is needed to feed the AI. Right.
Well, so you've been working on this for some time. This announcement you made also last year, the end of November, I think the end of 2017. What has been the progress that you've made so far? Because I think, when I travel around, we'll hear lots of announcements that happen from the government making investments. And then, small businesses may not, or businesses medium-sized, large, may not see those things come to fruition. So how has been the progress over the last couple of years as you've started to focus on those things in spite of the announcement yesterday, right? So what got you to this point, and how has that progress been going?
I think the plans in the AI and the strategy around AI, we were cooking up the second half of last year. So the announcements that have been made last year would be the AI Singapore program, the minister gave a brief update of progress of that program in his speech yesterday. For those of us who weren't in the room, the AI Singapore program is a program that tries to match AI research talents in our research institutes with companies in the marketplace who want to make use of AI within their companies. And there aren't any ready solution for that. So this matching system, this matching program, we call it 100 experiments, right? I think yesterday, Minister mentioned that there have been a very, very healthy interest. We've got 100 possible projects that we talked about. Interest is around 150, 170 companies that have been talking about it. I am told that a third of these slots have been taken or will be taken up soon. So that's just progress within the last half year or so. One of the things that we announced in November was the development of governance frameworks and a research program in law, policy, and governance issues. And those actually were the substance of our announcements yesterday, the 3 announcements that we made: an advisory council, a research program, as well as a proposed framework for us to have this constructive conversation around AI, use of data, and all the issues that we need to be aware of as we move into this area.
This is the first time we've actually seen 5 generations working in the workforce. People are living longer, millennials and even now younger than that, right, entering the workforce. They have very different relationships with technology, and they have very different adoption with technology. I mean, I remember the first time that I came into Singapore in my previous role, and I was fascinated by almost this, bankless community of, the age, they've never walked into a bank branch, right? Or everything on their smartphone, from sharing money to sharing information, and they've skipped right past the generation. I call myself a digital immigrant. I immigrated to digital, but I was not born in digital. So, when you have those 5 generations, how, does the region, Singapore, how do you deal with that as you can start giving healthcare to older generations, but they're very adverse to technology. You have younger generations that are demanding it, and as a government, it must be very challenging with that kind of landscape from a work perspective.
Oh, no doubts, no doubts. I think it's will. I don't ask why. This is the landscape that we have, and this is these are the issues that we have to work with, right, in order to get a thriving economy and to make sure that our workforce comes together. So we just have to be very clear about the differences, the preferences, and to be able to address them, to galvanize them to work together. I don't see it to be an issue, but something on the landscape that we just have to be aware of. I think I do agree with you that certain generation may actually have skipped over certain things, right? I think I use in the area of AI, I like to use the search engine analogy to see where we might see this in the future. So a lot of us, well, maybe not a lot of us, some of us may remember the days when search engine was Alta Vista and only internet search, right? But
with dial-up.
Oh yes, a dial-up modem and that whistling sound. But I think many of us today just assume that the search function has to be available on every computing device, every program. But we never got that way. We never got to hit this place in one step, right? I remember I was so excited back in the early noughties, right? When I don't know how many of you remember this desktop search engine. You had to download. I use X1 Search, right? You had to download a desktop search engine, install it on your operating system on your desktop in order to get search engines on your desktop. But now it's all integrated, and some of us skipped over that, and we just assume that search is available as a fundamental feature in every application and every device we use, but some of us remember the difference. But that just speaks to the diversity, but it also means that 2 things. One, we just realized that there are some people went through a different journey to get to where we are, but more importantly for AI, I do believe that we will see the same evolution and the same journey for AI. Today, I mean, for those of us who played around with AI, voice recognition as an example, long time ago, it was like 3 sheets of paper, 45 minutes of training, Dragon Dictate before you could get anything decent out of it. Today, it's changed differently. We expect to speak to our phone, right? And that's just one example of AI being integrated into our devices, integrated into our application. And I would like, one of the things that we would like to see is more companies thinking about how you could use narrow AI, function-specific AI, think about how that can be introduced into your product, introduced into as a feature, and that can get into the hands of very many people, and it will be as pervasive and as pervasive as air, like our SMS Janil said yesterday, and it will be an assumption for many of the younger generation that, hey, certain of these functionalities, we just assume that we want.
But with all these technology advancements, I think comes a very huge responsibility on how we use it, with trust and transparency and privacy, et cetera. And one of the very fascinating conversations I've started having lately is the comment made around the bias built into data and the bias built into artificial intelligence, right? As human beings, we may not even be aware of the biases we have, whether it's race, gender, disabilities, whatever it might be. But within data, there's also bias.
Yes.
And so, as you think about how these companies, as well as the government, right, can really use AI to better the lives, we have a responsibility to make sure we do it in a certain way. So maybe you could share with the audience sort of what you look at, what the group and the team looks at, and the new council around how do we protect this sort of data, the bias of it, as well, this sort of trust and transparency.
Sure. So one of the things that we introduced yesterday was the draft framework for us to have conversations like this around AI and data use, right? As you pointed out, the bias may exist in the data. It may be unconsciously built into your algorithm. And a lot of these biases are unintended. We just don't realize it. One of the things that we want to draw out is that as companies adopt this kind of technology, be a bit more conscious about the data, where the data is from, how it has been collected, is it being used in a slightly different way than the purpose for collection? Because these are areas where unintended bias can creep into the data. Be aware. So we take a different approach. I like to believe from some other parts of the world. I like to have all parameters available in the data set because we want all bias to be as easily spotted and identified as possible. But then the companies have to be responsible about how they are making use of the information and what steps they are taking to address some of the bias in the data set. Same thing applies in the algorithm as well. The framework talks a bit about audits of algorithms and all that things. But we do realize that some of these techniques are developing and may not be that useful, but the idea is the same. As you are making use of AI engines, ask your supplier those questions, right? How are we addressing some of these possible risks, right? And if you implement it within your system, you have to integrate it into an internal process. How are you addressing those risks? We don't pretend to know the answer. We don't prescribe the answer in our framework. But what the framework tries to do is to set up a structure, identify some of these issues, provide some common language for us to have that kind of discussions, both within the company as well as with your suppliers. And I think the third part, which is very important, is how then does the company engage its customers, the consumers that it's after. You need to figure out a way, right? How do you want to position yourself and how do you want to handle your customers?
Great. Well, in the last question, we just have about a minute left. What do you see as the future, in 1 minute, what's the future for Singapore and everything that you're investing in around AI and this digital transformation and disruption that's happening? What do you see 2 or 3 years out? What do you hope will come from all this work you're doing?
Well, my bias, right, has always been people and talent, right? We do all this because we want people around the world to notice that Singapore is a good place to park some of these functions, park some of this research analytics function, and Singapore is a good place if you're a startup or a company thinking about doing this kind of work to start. Why? Because one, we have an engaged regulator who is open to discussion and who wants to work with industry to develop rules that are sustainable and that strike a good balance between what businesses require and what consumers need. The second thing, that through this reputation, we will attract talents to come to Singapore to work here. We attract talents from multinationals to say that, hey, let's set up some of our functions here, and to grow the availability of talents to work in this area. Then other companies who are looking for services in this area will then very naturally want to congregate and come here and work and solve these problems here. So we like to see ourselves playing that role, right? And that's the vision that I have, in slightly more than 1 minute.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Let's give a hand for Zee. Thank you for joining me.